June 6, 1944. German soldiers laughed when they saw the Churchill AVRE's stubby cannon approaching their bunker, a fortress with 2-meter-thick concrete walls that had taken 2 years to build and was designed to withstand any tank shell the Allies could fire. Then the British fired a single 40-pound flying dustbin, and in one shot, the entire bunker didn't just collapse, it completely vanished, erasing months of work in seconds, while the crew inside never knew what hit them. But how did the Allies engineer a weapon so devastating that it made Hitler's entire Atlantic Wall defense strategy obsolete overnight, and why didn't the Germans see it coming?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the spring of 1944, the coast of Normandy, France, looked like a giant construction site made of concrete and steel. German leader Adolf Hitler had ordered his army to build something massive called the Atlantic Wall. This was not just one wall. It stretched thousands of miles from Norway all the way down to the border of Spain. Hitler believed this wall of bunkers and gun positions would stop any enemy from invading Europe. He poured tons of concrete, steel, and millions of work hours into making these fortresses. Germany was running out of tanks and planes, but Hitler kept building more and more bunkers. He thought if his soldiers stayed inside thick concrete walls with powerful machine guns, they could never lose. One of these bunkers sat on a cliff overlooking a beach that would later be called Omaha Beach. Inside this bunker worked Oberleutnant Klaus Weber, a German officer who used to be an architect before the war. Weber was not like other soldiers. He loved mathematics and engineering. Before Hitler came to power, Weber had designed beautiful buildings in Berlin. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In the spring of 1944, the coast of Normandy, France, looked like a giant construction site made of concrete and steel. German leader Adolf Hitler had ordered his army to build something massive called the Atlantic Wall. This was not just one wall, it stretched thousands of miles from Norway all the way down to the border of Spain. Hitler believed this wall of bunkers and gun positions would stop any enemy from invading Europe. He poured tons of concrete, steel, and millions of work hours into making these fortresses. Germany was running out of tanks and planes, but Hitler kept building more and more bunkers. He thought if his soldiers stayed inside thick concrete walls with powerful machine guns, they could never lose. One of these bunkers sat on a cliff overlooking a beach that would later be called Omaha Beach. Inside this bunker worked Oberleutnant Klaus Weber, a German officer who used to be an architect before the war. Weber was not like other soldiers. He loved mathematics and engineering. Before Hitler came to power, Weber had designed beautiful buildings in Berlin with tall windows and curved staircases. Now he designed death traps. His job was to make sure every bunker could kill as many enemy soldiers as possible. He took pride in his work, the same way he once took pride in designing a library or a concert hall. To Weber, a well-built bunker was like a perfect equation. 2 meters of reinforced concrete plus steel doors plus interlocking machine gun fire equaled an impossible fortress to break. The bunker Weber loved most was called WN-62. He had overseen every detail of its construction. French workers, forced to labor for the Germans, had mixed the concrete under his watchful eye. Weber made sure the walls were exactly 2 meters thick, not a centimeter less. He installed steel blast doors that weighed as much as a small car. Inside, his man had mounted the MG-42 machine gun, a weapon so fast it sounded like ripping cloth when it fired. The MG-42 could shoot 1,200 bullets every single minute. One gun could mow down an entire company of soldiers before they crossed a beach. Weber had positioned 3 of these guns in his bunker, each one covering a different angle. No matter where enemy soldiers landed, at least one gun could hit them. Every morning, Weber walked the beach below his bunker. He looked at the obstacles his men had planted in the sand. There were wooden stakes with mines attached, metal crosses that could rip the bottom out of landing boats, and concrete pyramids that blocked any vehicle from moving inland. Behind all of this sat his bunker, silent and patient like a sleeping dragon. The thick concrete absorbed the sound of the waves. Inside, the air always smelled like oil from the machine guns and damp stone. Weber's men kept the guns clean and ready. They stored thousands of bullets in metal boxes. They had food and water to last for weeks. Weber believed his bunker could survive anything the British or Americans could throw at it. But in May of 1944, something started to bother Weber. Intelligence reports began arriving from German headquarters. British spies and French resistance fighters had reported strange activity across the English Channel. The British were building unusual tanks. These were not normal tanks with long cannons designed to fight other tanks. The reports described vehicles with short, fat barrels. Some had strange metal frameworks on the front. Others carried enormous spools of material that looked like carpets. Weber read these reports in his small office inside the bunker. He studied grainy photographs taken by German reconnaissance planes. The images showed tanks that looked odd, almost comical. Their turrets were too small, their guns were too short. Weber showed the pictures to his commanding officer, who laughed and said these must be decoys meant to fool German intelligence. Still, Weber felt uneasy. He was an engineer, and engineers notice details that other people missed. Why would the British waste time building fake tanks that looked so strange? If you wanted to create a decoy, you would make it look like a real tank, not something bizarre. Weber kept the photographs in his desk drawer. Late at night, when he couldn't sleep, he took them out and studied them by candlelight. There was something about the short, stubby cannons that troubled him. They did not look like weapons meant to fight other tanks. They looked like something else entirely, but he could not figure out what. As spring turned into early summer, the German coastal garrison fell into a routine. Soldiers stood watch in the bunkers, scanning the ocean through periscopes. French civilians brought food and supplies from nearby villages. Weber inspected the concrete walls for cracks, tested the steel doors, and made sure the machine guns were properly maintained. The men played cards when they were off duty. They wrote letters home, they complained about the food, they told jokes about how the British would never dare to invade. The bunker felt safe and strong, like a medieval castle waiting for a siege that would never come. On June 5th, the evening felt different. The wind picked up from the sea, carrying salt spray against the concrete. Weber walked through his bunker one final time, running his hand along the walls. The concrete felt cool and solid under his palm. He checked the MG-42 positions, making sure each gun had a clear field of fire. Everything was perfect. Everything was ready. As the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky orange and red, Weber stood at the bunker's observation slit and looked out at the empty water. Somewhere across that dark channel, the British were preparing something. Weber could feel it, the way you can feel a storm coming before the first drops of rainfall. He just didn't know what was coming for him, hidden in the gathering darkness of the longest night before the longest day.
Dawn broke on June 6th with the thunder of naval guns. Weber jolted awake in his bunk as the entire bunker shook. Dust fell from the concrete ceiling. He grabbed his helmet and ran to the observation post. Through the armored slit, he saw something that made his stomach tighten. The ocean was no longer empty. Thousands of ships covered the water from horizon to horizon, more ships than Weber had ever imagined existed in the entire world. Battleships fired their massive guns, sending shells screaming overhead. The explosions walked across the beach like giant footsteps, throwing sand and smoke into the air. But Weber was not afraid. This was exactly what the bunker had been built for. The thick concrete walls absorbed each blast. Inside, his men were safe. Weber shouted orders to his gun crews. The MG-42s were loaded and ready. Through his periscope, he watched a landing craft pushing through the waves toward the beach. The boats dropped their ramps, and American soldiers poured out into the water. Weber's machine guns opened fire. The sound inside the bunker was deafening, like a giant tearing sheets of metal. The tracers streaked across the beach in red lines. Soldiers fell in the surf. Others tried to hide behind the beach obstacles. Weber felt no joy in this, but he felt certainty. His bunker was doing exactly what it was designed to do. The Americans could not advance. The concrete fortress was holding. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Weber saw something strange emerging from the smoke and spray. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him. A tank rolled off a landing craft, but it looked nothing like any tank he had seen before. It was based on a Churchill tank, the British heavy tank he recognized from intelligence reports, but someone had changed it into something else. Where a normal tank had a long gun barrel, this one had a short, fat tube that looked almost silly. The tank moved slowly up the beach, its tracks grinding through the sand. Weber watched it approach another bunker about 300 meters down the coast, a position called WN-61. He radioed the crew there to warn them, but they had already seen it. Through his radio headset, Weber heard the crew at WN-61 laughing. Their commander's voice crackled with amusement. "Look at that stubby little cannon," the man said. "What are they going to do, throw rocks at us?" Weber heard other voices joining in the laughter. "The British must be desperate," someone said, "if they are sending toys to fight bunkers." Weber kept watching through his periscope. Something about the way the tank moved bothered him. It was not in a hurry. It was not trying to dodge fire. It rolled forward with the patience of a worker going to do a job. The tank stopped about 100 meters from bunker WN-61. The short barrel elevated slightly, pointing at the bunker's concrete face. What happened next made Weber's blood turn cold. The stubby cannon fired with a loud thump that was different from any tank gun Weber had ever heard. Something flew through the air, tumbling end over end. It looked like a garbage can, a flying metal drum that seemed to move in slow motion. Then it hit the bunker. The explosion was not like a regular tank shell. It was something worse, something Weber had no words for. The entire front face of bunker WN-61 simply disappeared in a ball of orange fire and gray dust. Concrete chunks the size of cars flew through the air. Steel reinforcement bars twisted like spaghetti. The blast wave rolled across the beach, and Weber felt it even inside his own bunker 300 meters away. When the smoke cleared, Weber stared in disbelief. Where bunker WN-61 had stood, there was now just a smoking crater. The 2-meter-thick walls had not been penetrated. They had been erased, vaporized, turned into dust and fragments. German soldiers stumbled out of the ruins, their uniforms torn, blood running from their ears and noses. Some fell down and did not get up. Others wandered in circles, unable to hear or see properly. The machine gun that had been firing moments before was simply gone, along with the men who had been operating it.
Weber grabbed his radio and screamed into it, demanding to know what had happened. But no one from WN61 responded. There was only static. The strange tank moved on to its next target. Weber watched it approach another bunker, and now he understood what he was seeing. This was not a tank built to fight other tanks. This was a bunker killer, a specialized weapon designed to do one job perfectly: destroy concrete fortifications. The British had not tried to match German bunker designs. They had built a machine that made bunkers obsolete. Weber's hands shook as he adjusted his periscope. The tank fired again at another position. Another 40-pound demolition charge flew through the air. Another bunker exploded into fragments. One shot, one bunker. The efficiency was terrifying. All along the beach, Weber watched more of these strange tanks rolling ashore. The British called them AVREs, he would learn later, Armored Vehicle Royal Engineers. But their nickname was more descriptive. The Petard Mortar they carried fired what soldiers called a flying dustbin, a 40-pound bomb designed specifically to crack concrete. Weber had spent 2 years building bunker WN62. Teams of workers had poured the concrete. Engineers had calculated the exact thickness needed to stop any shell. And now Weber watched as bunkers exploded one after another, erased in single shots. His radio came alive with panicked voices. Bunker commanders all along the coast were screaming for help. "The walls are gone," one voice shouted. "They are not even trying to break through," another said. "They are just removing us." Weber realized the terrible truth. While Germany had spent years building static defenses, pouring concrete and steel into bunkers that could not move, the British had spent those same years building tools to destroy them. The Germans had built monuments to defensive warfare. The British had built a demolition crew on tracks. Weber looked at his own bunker's thick walls with new eyes. They no longer felt safe. They felt like a tomb waiting to be sealed. An AVRE was moving toward his position now, tracks squeaking, that stubby Petard mortar rotating toward him like the eye of fate itself. Weber watched the AVRE approach his bunker with the calm certainty of a man watching his own death arrive on schedule. The tank was less than 200 meters away now, close enough that he could see the dust on its armor and the way its tracks threw up sand with each rotation. Inside bunker WN62, his men still manned their machine guns, firing at Allied soldiers on the beach below. They had not yet seen what Weber had seen. They did not understand that their fortress had become a target, that all their concrete and steel meant nothing against what was coming for them.
Weber made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He grabbed the shoulder of his top gunner, a young man named Friedrich who had just turned 19 and still believed everything the Nazi propaganda had told him about German invincibility. Friedrich was firing controlled bursts from the MG-42, his face pressed against the gun sight, completely focused on the soldiers crossing the beach. Weber shouted at him to evacuate, but Friedrich could not hear over the roar of the machine gun. Weber looked through the observation slit and saw the AVRE stop. The Petard mortar was rotating, elevating, aiming directly at them. Weber had perhaps 30 seconds. He physically pulled Friedrich away from the gun. The young soldier turned on him in rage, shouting that Weber was a coward, that the Führer had promised these bunkers were invincible, that 2 meters of reinforced concrete could stop anything the enemy possessed. Friedrich's face was red with anger and certainty. He truly believed what he was saying. Weber had believed it too, just hours ago. Now Weber grabbed Friedrich by his uniform and dragged him toward the steel blast door at the rear of the bunker. 2 other crew members saw what was happening and followed. But the remaining gunner, an older soldier named Hans, who had survived the Russian front, refused to leave his post. Hans shouted that real German soldiers did not abandon their positions. He kept firing.
Weber got Friedrich and the two others through the blast door and into the rear exit tunnel. They stumbled down the concrete passage toward the emergency exit that opened onto the cliff behind the bunker. Weber could hear Hans still firing the MG-42, the sound echoing through the concrete chambers. Then Weber heard something else, a deep thump, like someone dropping a heavy barrel onto pavement. For a moment there was silence. Weber threw himself on top of Friedrich, covering the young soldier's body with his own. The world exploded. The blast wave hit Weber like a physical punch from a giant's fist. Even in the exit tunnel, protected by meters of earth and concrete, the force was incredible. His ears popped and started ringing. Dust and small stones rained down from the tunnel ceiling. The lights went out. In the darkness, Weber felt the entire hillside shaking. He could not breathe. His lungs would not work. Then, slowly, air returned to them, and he gasped like a drowning man breaking the surface. Under him, Friedrich was crying. The two other soldiers were pressed against the tunnel walls, their hands over their heads. When Weber finally got to his feet, his legs barely held him. He helped the others up, and they stumbled toward the exit. Outside, the morning sun felt too bright. Weber turned around to look at his bunker, his masterpiece, the fortress he had designed with such care and mathematical precision. It was gone. Not damaged, not cracked, gone. Where the main firing chamber had been, there was now a crater filled with broken concrete, twisted steel, and smoke. The 2-meter walls had been turned into rubble and dust. One entire side of the bunker had collapsed inward. Small fires burned in the wreckage. Weber could see the barrel of the MG-42 sticking up from the debris at an odd angle, bent like a piece of wire. Hans was dead. Weber knew it without having to search the ruins. No one could survive what he had just experienced in the exit tunnel, and Hans had been at the center of the blast. The older soldier had stayed at his post because he believed the bunker was invincible. He had died because he trusted concrete and steel more than he trusted his own eyes. Weber felt something break inside himself, something that had nothing to do with the physical explosion. It was his faith in everything he had been taught, everything he had believed about German engineering and military superiority. Weber sat down on the grass at the edge of the cliff, his legs giving out. Friedrich and the other 2 soldiers sat near him, all of them shaking, none of them speaking. Below, the invasion continued. More AVREs were rolling off landing craft. Weber watched them move from bunker to bunker like workers in a factory, doing a job with calm efficiency. Thump, explosion, crater, move to the next target. Thump, explosion, crater. The British crews were not celebrating or rushing. They were just solving problems. Each bunker was a problem. Each petard round was the solution. Weber thought about the 2 years he had spent on this coast. He had designed 17 different bunkers. He had supervised the pouring of thousands of tons of concrete. He had calculated firing angles and wall thicknesses with perfect mathematical precision. And in 2 hours, the British had made all of it meaningless. They had not beaten German bunkers by building better bunkers. They had simply invented a way to erase bunkers from existence. While Germany had worshipped defensive warfare, building thicker walls and stronger positions, the British had asked a simpler question: how do we get rid of bunkers? And they had built the answer. Friedrich finally spoke, his voice small and broken. He asked Weber what had happened, how the bunker could just disappear. Weber did not know how to explain it. He tried to find words that would make sense. Finally, he said that the British had built a special weapon just for destroying bunkers, a weapon that fired huge bombs designed to crack concrete. Friedrich asked why German intelligence had not warned them about this. Weber almost laughed, but it came out as a cough. German intelligence had warned them. Weber had seen the photographs of the strange tanks with stubby cannons. He had just been too arrogant to understand what he was looking at. They had all been too arrogant. Canadian soldiers found them an hour later, sitting on the cliff above the ruins of bunker WN-62. Weber and his men were too exhausted to resist. They put their hands up without being asked. As they were led down to the beach, Weber looked back one more time at the crater where his bunker had been. At that moment, he understood that Germany had already lost the war. Not because the Allies had more tanks or more planes, but because the Allies had something more important. They had the ability to see a problem and invent a solution, no matter how strange or specialized that solution needed to be. Germany had built walls. The Allies had built wall breakers, and in the end, the wall breakers always win. Weber spent 18 months in a prisoner of war camp in England and then another year in a camp in France before the Allies finally sent him home. When he stepped off the train in Cologne in the spring of 1946, he barely recognized his own country. The train station where he had once bought coffee and newspapers was now just 3 walls and a pile of bricks. The cathedral still stood, but everything around it had been flattened. Weber walked through streets that existed only as paths between mountains of rubble. Women and old men dug through the debris, looking for anything useful. Children played in bomb craters. The smell of dust and decay hung over everything like fog. Weber spent 18 months in a prisoner of war camp in England and then another year in a camp in France before the Allies finally sent him home. When he stepped off the train in Cologne in the spring of 1946, he barely recognized his own country. The train station where he had once bought coffee and newspapers was now just 3 walls and a pile of bricks. The cathedral still stood, but everything around it had been flattened. Weber walked through streets that existed only as paths between mountains of rubble. Women and old men dug through the debris, looking for anything useful. Children played in bomb craters. The smell of dust and decay hung over everything like fog.
What struck Weber most was not the destruction itself, but what he saw the British and French doing about it. On the edge of the city, Allied engineers worked with specialized equipment Weber had never seen before. They had bulldozers that could push aside entire collapsed buildings. They had cranes that could lift concrete slabs the size of rooms. They had trucks designed just for hauling rubble, with beds that tilted to dump their loads. Each piece of equipment was built for one specific job, and each job was part of a larger system of rebuilding. Weber stood and watched them work for an hour. The efficiency reminded him of the AVREs on D-Day. The Allies did not just have better tools, they had a better way of thinking about problems. Weber's family home was in the part of Cologne that had been completely destroyed by bombing. His wife and 2 children had survived by living in the basement, but the upper floors were gone. His father, who was 70 years old and had fought in the First World War, now lived in a corner of that basement behind a curtain made from old blankets. The old man's health was broken. He coughed constantly from breathing brick dust. When Weber arrived, his father embraced him with tears in his eyes, then asked the question Weber knew was coming. How did we lose? How did Germany, with the best engineers and the strongest fortifications and the most advanced weapons, lose to the British and Americans? Weber sat on a concrete block that had once been part of his kitchen. He pulled out a wrinkled piece of paper from his jacket pocket. During his time as a prisoner, he had sketched the Churchill AVRE from memory, drawing every detail he could remember. The short Petard Mortar, the thick armor, the simple, brutal purpose of the design. He showed this drawing to his father and told him about June 6th, about watching bunker after bunker disappear in single shots, about sitting in the ruins of his own fortress while the invasion rolled past him. His father studied the drawing with the eyes of someone who understood engineering, even if he did not understand modern warfare. "We lost," Weber said quietly, "because we fell in love with our own solutions. We built the Atlantic Wall and thought it made us unbeatable. We poured concrete and mounted machine guns and told ourselves that thickness equaled strength.
But the British did not try to break through our walls. They simply asked how to remove walls from the equation, and they built the answer. We worshipped our defenses. They worshipped problem-solving. Weber's father was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said that this was the same mistake Germany had made in the First War, building fortresses like Verdun and expecting them to win battles by existing. Some lessons, the old man said, are learned too late to matter. Weber found work helping to rebuild Cologne. His architecture training was valuable, even though most of what he designed now were simple things like temporary housing and repaired sewers. But he brought something new to his work, something he had learned watching the Allies operate. He began to think in terms of specialized solutions rather than general approaches. When they needed to clear a street, he designed a specific tool for moving that type of rubble. When they needed to shore up a damaged wall, he calculated the exact amount of support needed, nothing more and nothing less. Other German engineers noticed his methods and asked where they learned to work this way. Weber told them about the AVREs and the whole family of specialized Allied vehicles he had seen. The British had tanks that laid bridges, tanks that cleared mines, tanks that shot flames, tanks that carried fascines to fill ditches. Each one did one job perfectly. By the early 1950s, Weber had become a consultant for the new West German military. The generals wanted to know how to build the next Atlantic Wall, the next line of bunkers to stop the Russians if they invaded from the east. Weber told them they were asking the wrong question. He brought photographs of the Churchill AVRE to meetings. He showed them images of the Normandy bunkers reduced to craters. He explained that any fixed defense could be made obsolete by someone willing to invent a way around it. The future, he told them, belonged to forces that could move and adapt, not forces that could dig in and wait. Some generals were angry at this advice. Others listened. Weber's son, who was born after the war ended, grew up playing in the ruins that were slowly being cleared away. In the 1960s, when the boy was old enough to ask real questions, he found his father's old sketch of the AVRE. He wanted to know if the Allies had been smarter than the Germans. Weber thought carefully about how to answer. He said that intelligence was not the difference. The difference was attitude. The Allies assumed that every problem had a solution waiting to be invented. Germany had assumed that some problems could not exist because German ideology said they were impossible. When you believe your bunkers cannot be defeated, you stop thinking about what happens if someone defeats them. When you admit your bunkers might have weaknesses, you either build better bunkers or you stop relying on bunkers at all. The boy asked what his father had learned from the war. Weber walked him to a hill outside the city where one of the old German bunkers from the Rhine defense line still stood, abandoned and covered with vines. They went inside, and Weber showed his son the thick concrete walls, the narrow firing slits, the heavy steel door. This bunker, Weber said, was built to last forever. It was designed to be invincible. And look at it now. Empty, useless, a home for birds and rats. Because someone, somewhere, would have eventually invented a way to crack it open, just like the AVRE cracked open the Atlantic Wall. Strength is not about building something that cannot be broken. Strength is about being willing to break your own ideas before someone else does it for you. In 1972, Weber published a small memoir about his experiences on D-Day. It was not widely read, but the people who did read it remembered one passage. Weber wrote that the petard round that destroyed his bunker destroyed something more important than concrete and steel. It destroyed his faith in permanence, in the idea that you could build something so strong that it would never need to change. The British Churchill AVRE, he wrote, taught him that the future belongs to those who treat every solution as temporary, every defense as a problem waiting for someone clever enough to solve it. We lost the war in 1,000 bunkers because we confused thickness with intelligence, rigidity with strength. The real lesson of D-Day was simple. Innovation beats ideology. Adaptation beats doctrine, and 40 pounds of explosive in a flying dustbin beats 2 meters of concrete every single time. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.